Thank you, Chairman, Minister, ladies and gentlemen. It's a great pleasure for me to speak at this distinguished gathering here this morning. With a name like mine, of course, I must have some Donegal ancestry. And the lore is that we did leave Donegal some years ago for a minor battle down in Kinsale and got lost in North Tipperary on the way back. But I think we're in good company. Brendan actually was my first boss, so I have to be on best behaviour still this morning. I'm going to touch on some of the topics that Rena covered, but as the Chairman said, I want to focus in particular on the whole role of technology support in the context of competitiveness. I think, as other speakers have said, it is fair to say that for several years now, the agri-food sector has been relegated to the status of a sunset industry in economic policy making and public debate. Yet of late, I think it's also true to say that its importance has gained or enjoyed a renaissance in our consciousness. Within Ireland, there would appear to be a broad acceptance that the future of the Irish economy will increasingly be dependent on the sector as its leading indigenous industry. And also, I think there's a long-held view that if the economy is to achieve sustainable growth, that the emphasis must be placed on the export sector. And of course, the food and drink industry played a huge role in the Irish context. We're a small open economy. We're price takers on world markets. And of course, our ability to grow our exports will depend in the first instance on the growth in international markets. And it's true to say that for the last decade or so, the global markets for food have been undergoing truly extraordinary change. Population growth has been spectacular, at the equivalent of nearly a new Germany every year. Urbanisation has proceeded in tandem, and it is projected that by 2050, nearly 90% of the world's population will live in urban centres. Most of these developments are taking place in Asia and in China and India in particular. And when one adds the impact of rising incomes, and you can begin to understand the profound change that has taken place in dietary habits in these countries over a relatively short period. Countries such as China in particular have dramatically switched diets towards animal-based proteins and away from cereals. There is another profound and related trend which also augurs well for our food exporting industries. The price of our agricultural products, when adjusted for inflation, has tended to trend downwards by an annual 1 to 2% per annum for the last century or more. This trend has only been punctuated during the two world wars and the oil price crisis of the 1970s. But in 2008, as has been mentioned, and more recently, global food markets have experienced unprecedented price spikes. And the really interesting question is whether these recent developments are transitory or represent more long-term changes. Are we in fact witnessing a structural shift in what has been a century-old trend? Of course, we don't know for sure, but many of the underlying drivers of food prices do suggest that something quite substantial is happening. The demand changes are certainly structural in nature and are unlikely to be reversed in the short to medium term, although the dietary effects are mainly income-related and may be subject to check from time to time. But this factor will be more than offset, however, by the prospect of peak oil and the absorption of so much of the world's grain harvest for biofuel. In the US alone, for example, within a short 5 years' time, over 30% of corn production will be consumed in bioethanol plants. But it's apparent also that there has been a structural shift in the global supply of food. While there is plenty of cultivable land on a global basis, only a tiny fraction of this land is becoming available for food production on an annual basis. But a much more worrying development is that while we have experienced what was close to a 4% growth in yields on a global basis on the 30 years up to 1990, over the following 20 years or so, yields have only grown by at most 1% a year. And from a scientific viewpoint, this is depressing news, especially when we don't really understand the underlying causes. But from the perspective of a food exporting country like ourselves, we are presented, however, with real opportunities to grow our exports to new and expanding markets. Moreover, the terms of trade in these markets can also be expected to improve, though, as Rowena has pointed out, there is a strong likelihood of increasing price volatility. But we can't afford to be complacent. The UK's Royal Society, in a recent Foresight report, bluntly states, and I quote, that to address the unprecedented challenges that lie ahead in the food system, that system needs to change more radically in the coming decades than ever before, including during the industrial and green revolutions. The Irish agriculture and processing sectors must espouse fundamental changes if they are to fully capitalise on the benign scenario that has just been painted. And I would place a huge emphasis on the role of, as Arena did, of competitiveness. Competitiveness actions are needed to support, first of all, the creation of economies of scale. Second, the promotion of what I would call quality-based competitiveness. And third, and what I want to focus on primarily this morning, is the enhancement of innovation-based competitiveness. If we look at economies of scale, farm size is, of course, not an unambiguous indicator of the structural strength of a farm. Nonetheless, it does help to identify the medium to long-run competitiveness challenge. While the trend of increasing farm size continues in Ireland, up from 26 hectares in 1991 to 32 hectares in 2007, in other respects, as Rowena has pointed out, the structure of farming has disimproved. An ever-increasing proportion of the utilised agricultural area is now in the hands of part-time farmers. And while this, of course, may assist in underpinning rural incomes, it may have adverse implications for structural change. It is not that scale economies in primary agriculture are very large, but there is a minimum level of scale at which fixed costs can be financed, and too many of our farms are below this critical level. There is also scope, of course, for rationalisation in our food processing industry, but unfortunately the evidential basis for comment here is much more limited because of the absence of publicly available data. But the prospect of a substantial increase in milk production following the abolition of quotas in 2015 has focused attention on the need for our processing sectors to secure economies in the area of processing efficiency, marketing and innovation. There is no doubt a clear market failure in the operation of our land market. The market does not function to ensure that the sector operates in the most efficient manner. Bright young people in Ireland with the capability to transform the productivity of our land base, unlike their counterparts in a country like New Zealand, have little chance of a career in agriculture unless they are lucky to inherit land. For Irish farmers, though, competing on product quality differentiation in the context of quality-based competitiveness is a realistic goal. This is a key object of Food Harvest 2020, and it's designed to build on the clean green image that the sector has and to use it as a basis for competing in premium quality food markets. There is now a wealth of inter-country comparative evidence that Ireland is highly competitive on the basis of its relatively low carbon footprint for its dairy and beef sectors. And a substantial national research effort, however, will be needed to verify Ireland's broader sustainability credentials in aspects such as water usage and biodiversity. And significant investment is going to be needed to brand and market these credentials on a global basis. Turning now to my main concern here this morning is the issues that arise in the context of innovation, driving innovation-based competitiveness. The increased competition that the Irish agri-food sector will be exposed to in what will be less distorted, less protected market environments in the years ahead means that competitiveness will crucially depend more than ever on maintaining an innovation-based competitive edge. By this we mean a competitiveness based on research and technology transfer. Modern-day food production demands a wide range of skills and knowledge as well as technology, not only the traditional skills that have always been associated with primary crop and livestock production and the processing of food, but increasingly the technical and economic expertise required to capitalize on scientific advances is becoming of substantial importance. Moreover, the emphasis on sustainability is setting new challenges, not only to produce more food more competitively, but to do also whilst addressing other goals, such as the conservation of water, the reduction of greenhouse gas emissions, and the protection of biodiversity. There is a consensus that one of the crucial drivers of future food technology supply will be the rate of growth of yields due to the application of new science and technology. New knowledge is also required for the food system to become more sustainable, in particular to mitigate and adapt to climate change and to address the needs of the world's poorest. These challenges will require solutions at the limits of human ingenuity and at the forefront of scientific understanding. And no single technology or intervention will provide all of the answers, but there are real gains, I would submit, to be made by integrating biotechnological, agronomic and agroecological approaches. And of course, because of the significant time lags that will be involved in reaping the benefits of research, investment in new knowledge needs to be made now to solve the problems that will arise in the coming decades. Given the scale of the challenge of feeding 9 billion people by 2050, new technologies, such as the genetic modification of living organisms and the use of cloned livestock and nanotechnology, should not be excluded a priori on ethical or moral grounds. The human and environmental safety of any new technology, of course, needs to be rigorously established before its deployment, and it must follow a process of open and transparent decision-making. Decisions about the acceptability of new technologies need to be made in the context of competing risks, rather than by simplistic versions